Earlier this month, our team here at College Futures introduced a new strategic framework, and with it, an invitation for California's bold thinkers and innovators to help us reimagine post-secondary education and social mobility. Today, I'm sitting down with a good friend and colleague, Dr. Elizabeth González, our Chief Program and Strategy Officer here at College Futures, and we'll further discuss our new direction and answer some questions that we've received since we've made this great announcement. So I know for me, taking a look at where we are as an organization in light of everything that's going on around us, particularly as it relates to post-secondary education, is, I think, exactly where we need to be, particularly since we are focused here on California, and we're seeing trends that are having significant impacts about the future of post-secondary education in California. I know we all feel it. I know, as we think about the declining enrollments in higher education, we have to ask questions about why this is going on, what's happening behind the data. Looking at the declining enrollment in K-12 education as well. So birth rates are going down, less and less people are going into our K-12 schools, which means less and less people are thinking about going on to higher education, but there's more than that. Certainly before the pandemic, we started to feel this discontent. During and after the pandemic, we've seen just people turning away from post-secondary education. So really thinking about the inequality that we see continuing to show itself in California. I mean, we can't help it. Every time you walk outside, visit different communities, you see the inequality right in front of your face, whether you're going from the coast to the Inland Empire or the Central Valley, you see the inequality that is stark here in California. I know this impacts the entire nation. So, I think at least for me, and with our organization, it's really about asking questions. What's going on with our learners? How are they thinking about their post-secondary experience, particularly for those learners who have been underserved here in California, those learners that don't have the greatest opportunity to get a great post-secondary experience. And, we believe here at College Futures that is the path toward prosperity. That is the path toward achieving the California dream. So that's sort of the why. Why are we launching into this strategic refresh? Why have we decided to pivot? Not because of what we think will happen, but in many ways, we want to ask questions about what actually is happening. In many cases, the future is now. It's not about looking down the road as to all the things that are going to change. It's about taking a look under the hood now and seeing what is already changing and how we need to react and to pivot. So Elizabeth, I mean, you've been in philanthropy a long time. You've had a lot of amazing roles. What do you think our responsibility or the responsibility of philanthropy in general is all about?
Thanks for that. I think about this all the time, and sometimes I fear I sound like a broken record, but I really do believe that we have a fundamental responsibility because we are a philanthropy. We are an organization that sits on an endowment. We have histories, in our communities. And just like we're asking that question of how does higher education need to evolve? How do institutions need to evolve? We need to ask that question ourselves. How should we be evolving in a moment that you just laid out is completely changing? And so in moments of change, we don't have answers. We have to be asking those questions that you started to talk about. What are the questions that we should be asking? And philanthropy actually has such a privilege to set tables to ask those questions with others who very often have those answers. And so I think our responsibility as an organization with the mission that we have, with the opportunity, with the resources that we have, that we should be focused on continuing to ask, how can we influence post-secondary education to continue to evolve, to change, to innovate in service of impacting our learners for greater post-secondary attainment toward economic mobility?
I really like the way that you ended that It's really about economic mobility for the kind of learners that we're talking about. And let me be a little more specific, because I know, we toss around words like post-secondary education, college education. And, for us here at College Future, this is really about learners of all backgrounds who interact with some type of education or training beyond high school. And I think
Mhm.
trying to really be intentional about that is what we're talking about here. So when we talk about post-secondary education, it is about whether you're going to get a certificate or some training at a community college, getting your AA, transferring, going directly to the Cal State University system or the UC system or one of our great private nonprofit post-secondary institutions. That's what it's really all about. And then even beyond that, it's about how do we support these learners so that they can continue to gain the skills that they need to thrive in this crazy, ever-changing economy. So I know we toss around those terms, but I just want to take a moment to clarify that. And then finally, who are we talking about here? I mean, I think you hinted at that, Elizabeth. You talked about the privilege that we
Mhm.
enjoy in philanthropy. We get to sit here, you and I and the team, and it's a great position to be in, but we get to look at the field and try to understand what's going on. And people in the field are the ones who are struggling day to day, just trying to get through it. So it is a place of privilege that we want to, be serious about and actually use that privilege to try and make a change. So, we hear College Futures, we've always been about underserved learners. And in this case, it's wonderful that we have Governor Gavin Newsom, who issued a very aggressive goal for the state of California, at least 70% of working age adults having achieved a post-secondary credential. I think that's a very laudable goal, and I thank the governor for pushing us in that direction. But as I think about it, and for us at College Future, who are we talking about in that
Mhm.
70% goal? And for me, and I know you agree, it's about the learners who have been underserved. It's about learners who grow up in very low income communities, learners of color, first generation learners, working learners who are, juggling 2 and 3 jobs and have not had a chance to drop everything and go to college. So um, in your mind, what do you think about the kind of learners that we're focused on, and how are you thinking about highlighting them?
I think that's a really important point that you make about what we mean when we say underserved and thinking about it broadly, because I know I'm in conversations, and I get asked, what exactly do you mean there? And said,
Hmm.
I think we all know. We know it's learners who are currently underserved and those who have been underserved, Latinx students, Black students, particular communities in the Asian American community have been underserved. Those, as you mentioned, who are communities impacted by low wages, by poverty. So we know that. And we know that sometimes there are things that need to be done in service. There need to be solutions put in front of our institutions to meet particular segments of the population. So in the 70%, I don't think about it just as a particular population. I think about all of those communities that I just mentioned.
Hmm.
And I think with our strategy, by naming 70% attainment for those who have been underserved, we hold an aspiration to actually be in service of all of those communities. They've been underserved in similar ways and also in distinct ways. But I think that our naming that aspirational goal really is a rallying cry to say, irrespective of which one of those communities you come from, you should be supported to have access to a post-secondary experience, to persist, to thrive in that experience, and to complete that experience for your economic advancement and economic mobility. So that's how I think about that 70% attainment goal and who we're talking about in that goal.
It sounds like this is pretty personal to you.
It is very personal for me. You and I often talk about, where we grew up. We're both, kids from Southeast LA, and we represent some of that communities that have been underserved. I am a graduate of Bell Gardens High School, and I had the opportunity to go to a very fancy school. I went to Columbia University in New York, and I know a lot of it had to do with the kind of love I grew up with, the kind of support that I had from some amazing teachers and counselors. But for every Elizabeth, for every Bethy, there are very many more in my school that did not have that kind of support. And I think about this often, Eloy. You know, I often say I want to make sure my story is possible, but I've come to understand that I actually want to make sure a different story is possible. I liked the classroom. I loved a certain way of learning. And somebody said, oh, that's great. She will fit right in. There are different kinds of learners. There are different kinds of
Right.
knowledges, right? That we create, that we build over time. And that's why I think about our stories, right? There's not one pathway. I had the traditional pathway, but I grew up in a family with 5 kids, and my brother started at community college. Some of them dropped off and they went back on, onto the pathway. And that's when I think about who the learner is. So
Right.
yeah, it's pretty
Yeah, no,
passionate.
it's really about multiple pathways. There shouldn't be one on-ramp to opportunity. There should be multiple on-ramps to opportunity. And I think, our stories reflect that.
Yeah.
I grew up not too far from the City of Commerce in area of LA called the Florence Firestone District,
Yeah.
zip code 90001. And that's, you look up that zip code and it still has very, very sad post-secondary attainment rates. And that is the story of intergenerational poverty, about the lack of economic and social mobility. Being part of a vibrant county like Los Angeles, where there is enormous opportunity, these small communities in all parts of California feel like they're locked out. It's really by zip code. And the way I see it, and I know you agree, it's that post-secondary education, that chance to get some college after high school, that really is the lever that opens the door for a lot of first generation
Absolutely.
learners. And whether that comes at 18, or in my case, closer to 24 after I came back from the Army, it's still there. And certainly it's changed my life. It's changed the life of my kids forever. And that shift should continue generation to generation. So for me, when we think about those learners, that's what we're talking about. And finding those multiple pathways, highlighting the importance of baking in economic mobility into those pathways. It shouldn't be about, well, maybe they'll get it, maybe they won't. Let's introduce them to courses that are just going to improve, their understanding about themselves. That's all great. I applaud that. But for many learners, underserved learners, they have families. They have to feed their families. They have to pay the rent. They have to figure out how they're going to live day to day. Their stability is much different than the privileged stability that you and I have now. And so that's what I think we want to make sure and focus on, particularly in a society right now, in a country right now, that is very unstable. At least it feels very unstable. So as you think about the new strategic framework, how are you thinking about these challenges and leaning into them?
So how I think about, this moment that we're in, and really the living into that aspiration and getting us closer to a 70% attainment goal, the mission and vision we have for the foundation. I hope when I present these 3 focus areas, this new strategic framework, you can see a couple of things. One is our continued commitment to the learners of California, our commitment to seeking improvements in our current public system. And here's where it's different, is living into that future that is now, making space in our work to say, might there be different models and approaches and post-secondary experiences that don't look like that traditional pathway?
Right.
And so I want to share, our 3 focus areas that we think reflect that ambition and that intention. And that is the first one, advancing learner-centered innovations. And by that, I mean supporting models, approaches, solutions that address class-based and race-based barriers to cost and affordability, access, flexible pathways, credit mobility, learners really owning their learning. We know
Right.
there's a lot of that in this moment that we're in, and that's a good thing about disruption. There are solutions out there. There are third-party providers. There are entrepreneurs and innovators who are really thinking about how do they create these solutions that address those barriers. And so we seek to learn more about those solutions, those providers, and really think about how can we connect them to our learners. And so advancing learner-centered innovations is the first one. The second one is aligning post-secondary education for economic mobility. And this is really one where we really want to catalyze the field through research and convening to drive an actionable agenda that really delivers on the value and speaks to the value of post-secondary education, improving access, and creating meaningful opportunities for our learners. And so this is a really critical area of work that we really want to catalyze the field around, again, aligning post-secondary education for economic mobility. And then lastly, our third focus area is reimagining education for the future of work. What you were just talking about at the beginning of our time together. And that's really about reimagining, redesigning policies, practices, even things like financing mechanisms to support lifelong upskilling and reskilling for our learners. Really to do the things that we've just talked about, which is really increasing economic mobility for our learners. The world is changing, and so we need to make space in this new strategic framework to engage in conversations about what is that reimagining of our post-secondary system so that we can ensure that we have a really supportive system of reskilling and upskilling for the future. And so what I hope, again, folks see with this new strategic framework is a real openness to both continued current improvements and our supports for that, but also an opening of our aperture in our strategy to think really more transformatively and more future facing. I'll also just end by saying, Eloy, this is a year of learning. It is a year of transition. We have done really important work. We've had important partnerships, important projects over the last several years in our past strategy. And we are going to continue to transition from that work effectively, equitably with our partners. And we're going to be launching at the same time. And so we'll be learning, we'll be listening, we'll be engaging in conversations. And you're going to hear more about that over the coming year. For those who are viewing this, we have these three focus areas, and we'll have initiatives and projects that flow from them. And we'll be sharing that over the next year.
Oh, thanks for that. Your answer highlighted two things in my mind. One is you talked about the changes that are happening throughout the world. We're feeling them every day. History has not always shown that big changes like this in the world favor the lowest income people and communities. And so I think we have to be very intentional. What does this new AI driven economy look like for underserved learners? What should it look like? I think, we want to invite people to have that conversation now so that we're not having it at the back end when we're seeing,
that's right,
the damage that it's done to low-income communities again. So, I saw that clearly during the pandemic. We had talked about the digital divide for years. Suddenly we had a pandemic, and you see in stark reality the damage it did, the fact that many low-income communities did not have access to quality broadband, how they were shut out of education, how they were shut out of society, how they were shut out of any business opportunity that was being created during that time frame. So my hope is that some of this work guards against that possibility in the future. So, and again, you mentioned our past work. I want to take a moment and just say thank you to all of the partners that we've had along the way. This made some amazing changes throughout our time together with our partners, and we want to continue to carry that forward to the next iteration, to the next frontier, and hope that we continue to work with the same type of great partners that we've always had. So Let's talk about some of the questions that we've received so far
Mhm.
from partners, from others throughout California and throughout the nation. A lot of people asking questions, as you mentioned. What does this mean going forward?
Mhm.
So you mentioned two key roles that you intend for College Futures to play as a funder: focusing and brokering. What does this mean to you?
Thank you for asking. That's a really important question. And before I answer that, I do want to say that, part of our process in the strategic refresh last year was actually listening to many of the people that I hope are watching um, our conversation today, which is to ask that question: what is the best role of the College Futures Foundation, given our history, given our resources, uh, given the kind of role that we've played, historically in our field? And so focusing and brokering, I hope, reflect what some of that advice and some of those thoughts and insights that you provided for us. But to answer your question, by focusing, what we mean is focusing the field in a set of ideas, innovations, change makers inside and outside of public higher education, and brokering relationships between those people and those leaders with decision makers, expert practitioners, institutional leaders, and policymakers, so that together we're having a conversation about what are the potential solutions at scale that impact our underserved learners. So that's what I mean by focusing and brokering. We often talk about that there are many capacities that the foundation has. And while, yes,
Mhm.
we are a philanthropy and grant making is one of them, I often talk about the other capacities that we have: our convening capacity, the use of our voice to influence moving the field forward together collectively toward equity, post-secondary attainment, and economic mobility. And so we want to leverage those tools and
Mhm.
those resources of our voice, of our grant making, and our convening power to do so.
So I know we've had a lot of great partners, great grantees that have done amazing work. If I'm a current grantee or I've been a grantee in the past, can I be considered for a partnership under the new strategy?
I want to emphasize something that you've been saying, Eloy. I mean, we really value our grantees that were part of our current strategy. And while we're clear we're not going to be funding particular areas of work and projects that we've been doing over the last 5 years, we're open to conversations with our grantee partners about how does their work advance 70% attainment goal for underserved learners. So we want to hear that. We also want to hear how their work connects to our new strategic focus areas. As a funder, we have traditionally been invitation only, and
Mhm.
right now we will continue to be what they call a strategic grant maker, where we invite proposals and concepts. But I also want to say that in a new strategy, we're also having really important conversations internally to say, how do we ensure that we are as expansive and inclusive as possible, equity driven in our sourcing? Who are we listening to? How do we ensure that we really have our ear to the ground in the most expansive and inclusive ways?
So if I have questions or ideas about the new strategy, who can I talk to?
The two of us. You could talk to the two of us. And in fact, we are inviting your thoughts, your feedback, your comments on our new strategy, and email us at info@collegefutures.org. And if you see us, we're out and about, we're in conferences, please
Mhm.
do reach out, tap us on the shoulder, and take a minute with us to share, what you think about the new strategy.
Elizabeth, I really appreciate you taking some time to have this conversation with me today. I know it'll be helpful to a lot of the folks that we work with, that we interact with. I want to remind folks once again that you can reach out to us by emailing us at info@collegefutures.org. You can also visit our website to read more about our new strategic direction and our vision for a future where education fosters racial, social, and economic equity, unlocking upward mobility for generations to come. That's what we're all about. Looking forward to working with everyone to realize that future for California. And so thank you for joining us. And until next time, we'll see you soon.